All right, hello and welcome. My name is Luke Stevens, and I'm a tutor with Gordon State Success Center. With me is Professor Chad Davies, who teaches here at Gordon. Dr. Davies has been teaching students for 20 years and leads several Success Center workshops each year.
My name is Andy Kirby, and I'm also a tutor at the Gordon State College Success Center. We're together today to talk about some of the ways that college is different from high school and how students can work to bridge the transition more successfully. This video is the second in a series that will help you, the viewer, acquire the tools that you'll need. Dr. Davies, thanks for being here.
All right, so in your last video, you talked about college being different from high school, and you used the analogy of high school being more like a sit-down restaurant, while college is more like a fast food place, where you do your ordering directly from the menu.
That's right, yeah.
So can you be more specific as to some of the differences and how students can understand these?
Sure, I think the first thing we want to sort of talk about is there are some assumptions that get made about the students in a college environment. There's about 3 of those historically that lead to a setup in college that's very different than high school. So I think the first thing is we generally assume students are well prepared to do higher level work. And that kind of includes the idea that the student is able to read material to gain knowledge. The student is able to communicate in written and oral forms well enough to make their ideas clear, and that the student is numerically literate at some level so that they understand numbers and what they mean, and some of those sorts of things. So that's the first kind of assumption that we make. The second one is that we assume that since college is a voluntary thing, it's not mandatory, we don't make students come to college, that the student is fairly well motivated, right, to be here. They've chosen to be here, they want to be here, they're motivated to do what needs to be done, okay? And then the final thing we assume, the third thing that we tend to assume about a student, is the student is fairly well disciplined. In other words, you know, students who come to college have had to kind of go through, or some of them would say maybe survive, a lengthy 12-year process where they're given work and they have to go to classes and they sort of have to keep up with things. And through that process, the students have developed a certain amount of self-discipline that we can count on in establishing structures here at the college level so that they can be successful. Now, if the student's deficient in one or more of those areas, they're either going to have to work harder or they're going to have to do some background work to get up to the college level and up to the college speed so that they can be successful in those college level courses. So that's the first set of things that I think is important to understand.
So what's the first thing that a new student will notice in a college is being different because of these assumptions?
Well, the first big thing I think almost everybody, when I give seminars here at the college and I ask this question from freshman students after they've been here a couple of weeks, is almost the very first thing that comes out is how much less structure there is at college than there was at high school. When you go to high school is a very structured environment. Pretty much everybody gets there at about the same time, around 8 in the morning. Everybody stays till about the same time, around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Everybody goes from one class to the next class all at about the same time, usually in 1-hour chunks. That time is very structured, okay? There's very little free time during that, you know, roughly, 7-hour period where you're at school. And usually that's around lunchtime, right? Okay. Once the student leaves the school, unless they're participating in after-school or extracurricular activities, that time is very much their time. The student leaves the school and they don't have to worry about too much. They may have a little bit of homework they're taking home, but that homework might only be at most an hour an evening, right? And, you know, depending on the classes they're taking or what they're doing, they may or may not even have that much, okay? When you come to college, of course, it's so different, right? Every student is basically, you know, on their own schedule, and that schedule is so much less structured. Some students come at one time, some students come at a different time. It's just very, very different.
So that also extends to the scheduling structure, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does. I think the first thing is that since every student has a different set of goals here, every student's going to set up a different longer and shorter term schedule, right? somebody who, say, wants to study or major in business is going to have a different set of program requirements than somebody, say, majoring in psychology. So when we tell a student in business you have to take social science courses to fulfill your degree requirements, those students may take an economics class, whereas the psychology student, those students may take courses in things like sociology or anthropology, something like that. They're both social science area courses, but they're going to be a little different depending on the major. Now, since that curriculum is more flexible, class scheduling becomes very much more flexible. Each student builds their own schedule, which means that one student may take classes, say, 5 days a week. A different student may take classes 2 or 3 days a week. One student may take classes and get them all done in the morning so that they can get to work in the afternoon, or do some homework in the afternoon so they go to work in the evening. Whereas another student may say, well, look, I've got kids and I've got some childcare responsibilities, and so to get my kids off to school, I can't really do morning classes, so maybe I'll look at something more towards an afternoon. If we've got a student who's maybe a working student, they may take night classes. And the thing is, that means that each student is going to create a schedule that works for them, their goals, their life, the things that are going on around those. So that means that each student has to build a schedule based off what they're doing, not what their friends are doing, right? Go ahead.
And just because one person is taking a certain class, that doesn't mean that it's the best class for someone else.
Right, exactly. It's kind of what we were talking about there just a few minutes ago. This is why we have academic advisors. Okay, every student, when they come to Gordon State, will be assigned an academic advisor. Very frequently, those academic advisors will be academic advisors with understanding and experience in their program or major areas. And those advisors are going to give the students academic advice so that the student makes good progress towards their academic degree. Therefore, it's really important that the student follow those instructions, instead of saying, well, gee, I don't feel like taking, say, a chemistry class. My friends aren't taking a chemistry class. I don't feel like taking a chemistry class because it doesn't fit into a schedule very well necessarily, and the advisor says you got to take that. It's probably a good idea that you need to take that.
So what's another difference?
Okay. The second difference that's probably really apparent after you get that first sense of this, the way flexibility happens, is what I call time on task. The very different way we structure time on task here at Gordon State with a professor.
Now, does this mean that college classes require less work than high school classes did?
No, actually it doesn't. And this is probably the hardest misconception, I think, that folks who aren't experienced with the college environment have to break. Student comes here and they sign up for classes and they start counting up the number of hours they're in class. And like I say, in high school you were there 5 days a week, you were there 7 hours a day, you were in class 35, maybe 40 hours a week. And you come in and you sign up for a 15 credit hour load here, and all of a sudden you look out and you count the class hours in your schedule and you say, oh, I'm only in class 15 hours a week. College must not be as hard as high school. Unfortunately, that's a really big misconception. Okay.
So can you give us an example?
Absolutely. Probably the best example and the easiest one to sort of wrap your head around is, and I don't know so much in high school now how this works, but when I was a high school student, and for a long time in high schools, there was this class called Algebra 2, right? You guys may have taken Algebra 2.
Yeah.
Algebra 2, you would meet 5 days a week for an hour, and you would do that for 36 weeks over the course of a year. So if you add up all that time, that comes out to be about 180 hours. Okay. We have a course at Gordon that's somewhat similar, right? We cover a little more material at a little more depth, and then we ask the students to apply that to more complex problems. We call the course college algebra, right? Math 1111. Now, college algebra is taught in a one-semester format, so if we take a typical one-semester format course, you're going to meet 3 days a week, right, for 1 hour each of those days, and it's going to be 15 weeks. And that's only 45 hours, okay? And so that means what's going to happen is there's every bit as much work in those two courses because they're the same basic course, right? Maybe even a little more in the college course because we want you to be able to apply it to more complex situations, right?
So that's a big difference. 180 hours of high school versus 45 hours of college.
Right. So the class isn't easier. There isn't less material to learn. What we've really done is started to push things out of the classroom.
So the student still needs to schedule time to do the work.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's because we assume that the student, based on those three initial assumptions that we talked about, we assume the student is going to be able to better schedule their lives, right? And so we develop what we call, and this is just a rule of thumb, okay, what we call the 3-to-1 rule. And the idea of the 3-to-1 rule is for every 1 credit hour you schedule or you sign up for, you need to spend 3 hours a week on that class, right? Doing the minimum things. So the way that's going to work is one of those hours is in the classroom. The other 2 are used to do studying for exams and taking care of the homework and writing your papers and all of the kinds of things that you normally do to make sure the class gets taken care of, okay?
So if a student signs up to take 15 credit hours, they should expect and plan to spend 45 hours per week on school-related activities.
Yeah, that's exactly the calculation, right? Another way I tend to tell students to talk about or think about this is, if you take a class, plan to spend 1 hour per day working on that class outside of a classroom meeting time.
So can the students take a day off?
That's always a great question, right? And I usually tell my students, here's what you're going to do. Let's say you're taking 15 credit hours, you're taking 5 classes. Okay, that's 15 credit hour load. What I tell students to do is, in that case, you're going to spend 1 hour per day on each of those classes, 6 days a week, and then take 1 day off. I think that's probably a good idea to take 1 day where you just don't worry about school, you don't think about school, you get stuff taken care of that are other things in your lives, but that assumes that you spend the other 6 days working on your classes.
Now, some students might ask, but isn't college about having fun?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's certainly a sense in college that part of the college experience is a lot of enjoyment and a lot of recreational activities and that sort of thing. And I don't think any of us as professors really have a problem with students who want to enjoy those things. But if we look at this, if you signed up for those 5 classes, those 15 credit hours, what you're probably going to do on average is take about 3 classes in a Monday, Wednesday, Friday setting. You're going to take 2 classes in a Tuesday, Thursday setting. That basically means you're going to spend 3 hours in a classroom with a professor, right? You're then going to spend 5 hours, 1 hour per class per day outside of class. Well, that gets you to 8 hours a day, which is it's only a little bit more time than you were spending in high school. You can do that 5 days a week plus the 5 hours either on Saturday or Sunday perhaps, right? And what that's like, that's just like a full-time job, right? 15 credit hour loads, about a full-time job, okay? That still leaves you plenty of time in the day to do some other things, but make sure you get your work taken care of before you do the other things. One way that I sort of, and I talk about with our business majors, I talk about this idea that I think you can think of your classroom meeting time as committee meetings, where you get together with other members of the committee to talk about all the work that you're getting done and what you're doing, and oh yes, I worked on this, and here's a progress report on that and all that. The rest of the time, it's like you go back to your office, wherever you happen to study, and you do all the work that you have to do to prepare for the next committee meeting that you're going to have, where I'm going to give a progress report and here are an update from this guy and where are we at on this thing and that kind of thing. So I think that's probably a reasonably good way to think about that, to where you create a balance in your studying.
Well, someone once told me that if you just get your work done, you'll be fine in college. Is that true?
It's funny that you mentioned that. I can remember my dad and I, when I was a high school senior, sitting around our dinner table and my dad telling me that exact thing. And I wish that were true, and it's not, unfortunately.
Well, why not?
I think there is really a strong correlation between how much a student works and how good a grade they get. But as a professor, I have no ability to measure how hard a student works. That's not something I can do, unless I could be really creepy, right? You set up a web camera, and they had to work at a certain place, and it was like some sort of 1984 George Orwell kind of Hunger Games thing or something, right? I mean, there's no way I can measure how hard a student works. And it only may take you an hour to master a concept, or it may take you 2. I can't measure any of that, and it wouldn't be appropriate necessarily for me to measure that. So instead, what I can measure is, as I kind of mentioned a moment ago, I can measure whether you master the material or not. If you master the material, that's great. If you don't master the material, not so much.
So most of the grades in a class will come from exams?
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be a series of assessments, but probably what I call the 1 hour exam is the most common form of assessment that we have. You sometimes will have some in-class work or some homework. You will sometimes occasionally have in-class papers or essays. A big thing in a lot of the humanities types classes, you will see that you may have out of class larger papers that you have to do. But in all of those cases, what we're focusing on as the professors is measuring how much of the material the student has mastered and have they mastered it at the right level, which is usually not, hey, have you memorized a bunch of information? It's, do you understand what you've memorized? Can you apply that to, say, solve problems or to critically think or be creative or whatever the case may be? If a student can do that, they're going to get great grades, no matter how hard they work. If a student doesn't master the material at the right level, doesn't matter how hard they work, they're not going to get a good grade. And as I said before, though, there's a pretty strong correlation to students who put in the time and how much material they master, right?
Is there anything else?
I think at this point that should cover the basics. Now, there are going to be some specific things we're going to want to talk about, I think, a little later, but we've got enough right now for folks to think about. Maybe we can cover that in a later video.
Okay, well, thank you again, and thanks to our viewers who have taken the time to watch these videos. Look for more videos about how to make the most of your college experience on the Gordon State College Student Success Center YouTube channel.